Welcome to Business Talk with Meghan McNulty, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of business success and reveals the strategies, insights, and stories that drive these professionals to thrive in the ever-evolving world of business. Whether you're an established entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply fascinated by the world of commerce, this podcast is your front row seat to learn from the best. Each episode, Meghan will bring you engaging interviews with professionals from diverse industries who will share their triumphs, lessons learned, and the insights they've gained along the way.
So Amber, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely.
I'm part of an organization called California Women's Leadership Association, and we're focused on helping women get elected to office. And you now hold a spot in South Dakota. Could you tell us a little bit about that and your journey getting there?
Absolutely. So I am a state senator in South Dakota, freshman, just elected just this last November. Just got through our first legislative session in South Dakota, and I ran against an 8-year incumbent, and so it was a crazy race. We raised a lot of money for a South Dakota state senate race, but I'm the youngest female Republican elected in state senate history for South Dakota.
And you ran against an incumbent, which is really hard to do. Amazing. So what inspired you to get involved and to actually go and run post school, right? So you just graduated from law school. So what inspired you to do this?
Well, so I was interested in running for office since I was very, very young, which is not something that's very common. I grew up in a town called the Veterans Town, and my dad is a disabled veteran. And when I was around 13 years old, the Obama administration actually had made a policy decision to close one of the VA hospitals in South Dakota, which was in my hometown. And this was a time when the border was not the number one issue on TV. It was actually veterans dying in line to get care. And our VA in Hot Springs, South Dakota was actually one of the few 5-star facilities that was getting veterans care fast enough or up to standard. And so I was really frustrated that the federal government kind of flick of a pen could upend my town and everything that I knew, but they were doing something that was wrong. And I was frustrated that my elected officials at that time, we were just sending letters to them and doing protests and things, but they weren't really doing anything about it. And so much now, so that 10 years later, we're actually having to kind of pick up arms again and fight to keep the VA open even 10 years later. And so in that moment, I decided that I didn't want to be sending letters to ineffective politicians who weren't representing me or my community's beliefs. And so I made it my mission to go away and get my law degree and get as much experience as I could, and then eventually run to represent and be a voice for my community.
Amazing. What would you say the hardest challenge of running a campaign was?
I think that it's really interesting because you have this kitchen cabinet of people that are going to get behind you, and some of them are the most unexpected people that you would ever meet, right? You have people that come out of the woodwork to help you that you didn't know before you started running, and they're the ones that are there on the days in the rain, door knocking with you, or one of the 5 people that show up at some little event that you're having in a little tiny, almost like ghost town that's a part of my district. And so I think the most surprising and challenging part was putting together a team of people who really had your back through thick and thin, and it brings you so many unexpected friends and allies.
Do you think you had any specific challenges as a woman running in this race in South Dakota?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it was really interesting, some of the rhetoric, because I was so young, and I'm unmarried, I don't have any children, and so there was rhetoric even in some of the op-eds in my local newspaper about how Amber Hulse needs to get married and have children and really learn about life before she can run for office. And I found that, one, frustrating, but also just really interesting, because the whole idea of our country is to have people that are, representative of the whole population. And we make lots of decisions in the state legislature about dual credits for college and our, state institutions. And here I was, somebody who had just been in those classrooms, perfect voice to be at the table to decide how we could make our state better in those contexts. And so, yeah, I might not be married yet, I might not have kids yet, but there's 34 other people in the state Senate that have those experiences. So why not bring a different perspective to the table as well?
Absolutely. What would you say, did you do anything to prepare for running for office, or would you give anyone advice who wants to run for office?
Yeah, so I interned for a lot of different people. I clerked for a lot of different people, so that was helpful. I worked as a law clerk in the governor's office. I learned a lot about the different state agencies to be prepared on content and to be knowledgeable about the position that I was running for, so that I was educated if I did win the race. But then additionally, I think it's really important if you're thinking about running to go do some kind of seminar with like the Leadership Institute or other organizations in your area that are preparing people to run for office. There's all kinds of different seminars and things. I took a class at Georgetown Law actually called Campaigning for Office, and that was really helpful just to get your message and rhetoric kind of honed in as to, you know, your why you're running for office, because so many people, you know, they have the skill set and the knowledge and the ability to do it, but if you don't have a concise message to convey to people, you kind of lose their attention. So those things are really important, especially as a first-time candidate.
Absolutely. I imagine it's a lot of hard work and luck and not easy. You have to be very determined to get there. So now you won your campaign and had your first session, right? So let's just like tell me, what are the top issues facing South Dakota as a state?
Well, the number one issue right now is property taxes. So that was a big, huge issue, especially in my district specifically, 'cause the real estate prices have gone through the moon since COVID-19 happened. Otherwise, there were a lot of election integrity issues this year. And I would say probably the third topic was the budget, because South Dakota's budget was very tight this year, and we have a requirement to have a balanced budget in South Dakota. And so there was a lot of cuts this year to like the library or South Dakota Public Broadcasting, different issues that the people got very loud about their certain services that they didn't want to be cut in a tight budget year.
Oh, that's hard. And you have to take money away from certain people. You're probably like, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Everyone always wants to say cut spending, cut spending, cut spending until it's, you know, something that they apparently still want to utilize. So.
Right. And yes, I agree. Interesting. What are there certain issues that you're focused on?
Yeah, so I mean, those two issues,
Those are your
integrity,
yeah, the same ones for the state. Yeah.
Property taxes. I carry quite a few bills over both those issues.
What, like, can you tell us a little bit about, like, I know in California, we have property taxes. When someone dies, you know, the property can get reassessed if they have inherited property. And then obviously it's very difficult to buy real estate in California because the property taxes are so high. So you might be able to afford the house, but can you afford the yearly property taxes? So similar, like, how does property tax work in South Dakota? I have no idea.
Yeah, so in South Dakota, we don't have Prop 13. So when you buy a home as a new homeowner, you have the same question. Can I afford the property taxes? Because what'll happen is, let's say I owned my home and 2 years later, you're going to move from California to South Dakota, and $1 million goes a lot longer way in South Dakota than it does in California. So you may overpay on a house because you think that it's worth that, because to you, you're getting way more acreage or a bigger home than you would ever anticipated because the dollar just goes further. But what'll happen is if you overpay on your home and I'm your next door neighbor, well, now my house is automatically worth more because there was a comp in the neighborhood. Wow. And so my property taxes automatically go up, even though I'm not using any more services. I've done no upgrades to my house. And so you have this kind of tax on almost unrealized gains, because it's great. You want your house to become worth more, but how far do you push that so that people can stay in their homes? And so that was one of the bills I brought. I like to call it Prop 13 Light, because it was not as aggressive as Prop 13. It was a similar idea to try to stop some of the assessment values from being run away due to this issue that we're exactly speaking to. And South Dakota's number one industry is the agriculture industry. And so there's always a lot of pushback when you start to mess with the different categories of property and assessment values, because there's a fear that some of that burden is going to get shifted onto ag. And so that's kind of where my bill failed, because there was a concern from the agriculture industry. But there definitely something needs to be done for both seniors and first-time home buyers in South Dakota to protect them from these crazy increases in assessment values, and therefore then their property tax bill going up.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that'd be really unexpected. All of a sudden someone buys something and then, oh yeah, your property taxes due just because that person paid this amount. It's like, whoa, increase for that reason. So that would scare me. So I think that was a good bill to work on. So I have a question. How do you think that right now, I would say, there's not as many women in office as men. Do you think that, and not that we want to make this all about women versus men, but do you think that there are certain things that's going to change in the coming years, or do you have any opinion on that?
I mean, I think we've seen a lot of progress,
yeah.
right? Like more women have been running for office, and I think that's a good thing. There's a lot of studies that show that women actually are better at being bipartisan. So if you have a very divided legislature or Congress, that having more women involved gets more legislation through, even when oftentimes things are very divisive. But at the same time, I think that it is also interesting to see how cultural shifts are happening right now in our country, and there are many women who are, kind of pushing back against this like mainstream feminism idea, and like the girl boss thing is going away. Many women are not ashamed to be, I don't want to say necessarily stay-at-home moms, but taking on more of this like traditional role as a woman again. And not that running for office doesn't fit into that, because you can still be a mom and be a leader. But I think especially even for my generation, Gen Z, there's a lot of young women who are kind of pushing back against this like, corporate girl boss message that's been kind of shoved down the throat of so many women that like wake up when they're, 45, 50 years old, and they're like, what did I do?
Right, lots of millennials.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting. I still think it's really important though to have diversity, not only of gender, but also of age. In a legislative body, because you need that diversity of thought and cultural differences and opinions.
So so we just talked about, being a woman and kind of balancing that and the responsibilities women have. How do you like run for office and work, and how do you balance your time?
Well, in South Dakota, we only have 38 legislative days, and so it's only really January to March that you're in Pierre as senator or representative. So that's one thing that makes it nice, because you can kind of have your own life for the other 9 months out of the year. So I work as an associate at Dillon Law Group. Harmeet Dillon, who's very involved in California politics. So she is one of my mentors and women that have, taken me in and pushed me to continue to pursue like my political ambitions in addition to being a young budding lawyer. But yeah, it's definitely, you have to find people who are willing to support you, because it is a juggling act, and you can't do everything all at once to the best of your abilities, because you're juggling plates at the same time. And so finding someone who was willing to, also help me grow as a young lawyer, but then, be a legislator was really important to me. But it is helpful in a state where you aren't a legislator for, more than 3 months out of the year, to have that balance and still have some sort of normalcy in real life in a citizen legislature.
Right. So, so can you explain to those who are listening that might not understand what the responsibilities of being a legislator are? So you just had a session, and sessions where everybody from around the state who represents their communities or their districts comes in to meet. And can you kind of like tell them like what you guys have to get done during that time and why it's in January? If they picked that for some reason, I'm just curious. So
yeah, I think that the like winter timeline has probably something to do with agriculture, because during January to March, you're not plowing a field, you're not having to harvest, and so that was a time that like the farmers and ranchers of days past could go to the Capitol. And that was one of the ideas too of the citizen legislature, they call it, is people that aren't full-time politicians. They're only there for a certain amount of time, and then you go back to your day job, so that you have to live under the laws that you just passed. But for the 38 days that we are in Pierre, we have 38 days to pass a balanced budget. So we had a $7 billion budget this year that we had to come up with. And then we have committee hearings in the mornings, and then we have regular session in the afternoon. So if you ever watched, I'm Just a Bill from the Schoolhouse Rock.
Absolutely.
We do that entire process for, I think there was, I don't know, a couple hundred bills this year that we had to get through. And so it's like drinking from a fire hose, because we don't have a professional staff. It's just you and your laptop against the world. So, having to read all the bills, follow all the minutes. I mean, all of it is done on your own, which is really empowering in a way, because especially as a young woman, I was the one that people were coming to. It wasn't my chief of staff. It wasn't my policy director. Like, you're the person, you're the legislator, and everyone, is there to serve you. Even some of the lobbyists are almost like your staff in a way, because they're the ones that like are so knowledgeable on the issue, like a professional staff would be. But in South Dakota, we don't have staff.
Full offices.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds like very intense and a lot of work. So how do you keep yourself, like, now session's over, so the rest of the year, how are you going to keep up on everything? And where do you get your news and education from?
Yeah, so we elect what we call the E-board. So there are members that are, I guess, more full-time legislators during the other 9 months that are paying attention to things. And then we do these things called summer studies. So we'll pick 5 topics that we're going to really focus on for the next legislative session, because during session, you don't really have time to craft legislation. You have to come to session with your bills already ready to rock and roll, because you just don't have time to be like putting together language. And so over the summer and the 9 months, you spend time working up whatever your policy issues and bills are going to be for the next year. So I'll do that in the interim. But otherwise, there's a couple of really great newspapers in South Dakota that are kind of the political, I guess, I don't want to call them blogs. They really focus on local and state politics, which are great sources. And then, I like to stay apprised of what's happening at the national level too. And there are great organizations like the National Conference of State Legislators that, sends out information about what other states are doing, because you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. It's kind of a couple of things that I stay apprised of. And then also in my day job as a lawyer for Dillon Law, we work on a lot of national issues all the time, especially with election integrity and other, political cases. And so that also in my day job helps me to be a little bit more apprised of what's happening in other states. And a couple of the ideas that I have actually come from that, to make sure that like some of the issues that are happening in states like California and Arizona don't ever come to South Dakota.
Right. So since you're from South Dakota and you're born and raised there, what would you say is so special about it as a state compared to some of the other states?
Well, we have Mount Rushmore, first of all, which a lot of people don't realize. And so that was about an hour away from where I grew up and is actually in my district. And so I get to represent Mount Rushmore, one of the most famous things about our state. Otherwise, I think it's really interesting because South Dakota goes from like mountainous, what you would imagine like Wyoming or Colorado or Montana looking like, all the way to the other side of the state, which looks more like Iowa. And so we have a very diverse state, and the river runs through it. So we even have some, waterways and shorelines as well. And so just the diversity of, I guess, backgrounds and even the farmers versus the ranchers contact on the east and west side of the state. It makes policy making very interesting just because it's so different across, 200 miles wide.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been to Mount Rushmore. It's beautiful. I did not know that it kind of switches the terrain. So that doesn't, I'll have to check that out. Okay. So then my next question for you is, when you run for office, you have to be really focused on, obviously, you're very committed, but also fundraising. Can you like talk to me, people that are listening who want to like hold office and I don't know, anywhere, like what you learned about fundraising at all? That's put you on the spot, but I think that's really important. And I see a lot of good candidates who don't make it because they don't have a fundraising machine in place. So did you learn anything that you didn't know before, or it's just about hard work and knocking on doors to say, hey, like we have to fund this campaign?
I mean, it's interesting. So in South Dakota, it doesn't cost very much to run for office. So first of all, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because we probably raised 1/10 of what even like a city council race in maybe not even a 10th, like a percentage. So for my state senate race, I think it was like $60,000 to $80,000 total, which was like unheard of in South Dakota. Like that's way more money than most people spend on their legislative races.
That's a lot of money.
But like
not a lot of money compared to California. Is what I meant.
I mean, most states, like I've heard, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million for state legislative races. So this is very small beans compared to most states. But I would say, I think the most surprising part of it is that you have to just not be afraid to ask. And there are people that will, like I said, come out of the woodwork to support you that you didn't even know before you announced that you were running, who then will be somebody that you're calling like every fundraising period to ask for more money, and they will give it to you on the spot. I learned a lot about, I think, most about small dollar donations, because most of my fundraising came from, just random people who, if they gave me $100, I mean, well, if you get 100 people, they give you $100. It's a lot of money pretty quickly. So you can raise money even if you aren't necessarily connected. And once you do get elected, then other like interest groups and different, PACs and lobbying organizations do donate to you. So that's helpful. But when you're a first time candidate, you really do have to have a base of support around you and to somehow gain traction with in your community and make people believe in you enough to give you money. And that's, once they give you money, they obviously really trust and believe in you and support you, and they'll back you for, forever. But you have to find some way, like I said, to get your message across and inspire people to want to give you their hard-earned dollars.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to see the difference between like how much you have to raise in California versus other states, but that's a lot of money for that state, right? So yeah, I like that. And I think that's important because I've seen a lot of people go the opposite direction who would have been great candidates but just couldn't fundraise, like some of the other well-known names. my other question about running is I'm just curious what you think from like, we have a lot of great talent that's younger, that's coming up. Do you think that, how can they stand out from some of these other incumbents that have been around a long time? Not that there's nothing wrong with the incumbents, but like, we do need to kind of usher in the next generation of leaders. Otherwise, we're gonna be in trouble. We have the largest population of baby boomers retiring, the largest transfer of wealth in the United States we've ever seen. And, you know, now we've got the millennials and the next generation, and a lot of people will say we're not ready. So what do you think, like, how can they stand out compared to the older leaders that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a contingency of people that are just gonna look at you and look at the age next to your name and discredit you no matter what you do, right? And so you can't try to enter into the political arena trying to get those people to respect you or believe in you, because there are just some people that just won't, right?
Right.
So once you get that kind of category of humans out of the picture, then you have to ask yourself, like, do I actually know enough to do this, right? And so for me, like, I had interned and clerked and done enough around the Capitol building that even other people who originally had been doubting me at the end of this legislative session said, you know, we had you wrong. Like, you actually really came into this and knew what you were doing. Like, you were a seasoned player around this place. And so, you know, you just have to do enough that you believe in your own self, because that also translates to the general public. And so whether that's, you know, while you're in school, getting as much hands-on experience as you possibly can, volunteer on a campaign, run someone else's campaign, do some of these seminars. I mean, there's so many resources and things out there to help you prepare for running for office if that's what you're interested in. But at the same time too, like, there are older people, even incumbents, who want to pass on this like institutional knowledge on to the next generation. Like, there was somebody at a debate at one point, actually it was my opponent, who said, like, I'm getting tired, like, I don't want to have to be fighting this fight anymore. And it was so funny because I was like, okay, but the next generation is here and stepping up, like, pass the torch, you know.
Yeah.
Here I am. I love that quote that's like, if not me, then who?
Right.
And so it got to the point where I looked around and I was like, okay, well, if I don't run against this person who is ineffective and is not, you know, essentially being a voice for our district that we need anymore, then if there's not somebody else stepping up to the plate that could do better than me, then, like, why don't I run, right? And so that really drove me. And I think that if you do believe in yourself and you know in your heart of hearts that you have the ability to do the job, that's going to translate to other people and they'll believe in you too.
What do you think, like, if we can be a little bit political, because we're a non-political organization, but you know, what do you think is going to bridge the gap between like conservatives and liberals? How do you think, like, how do you navigate that? Was it difficult for you? Or I know South Dakota is relatively conservative, but like, how do we, like, the next thing is, like, you know, win over hearts and minds of the other side, like liberals that, you know, maybe would have back in the day voted Democrat, but now they don't really recognize a Democrat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the Trump organization and even the RNC has done a really great job over the last even like 24 months. I mean, look at, you know, we had Amber Rose speaking as like a rapper at the RNC, and you know, people like RFK coming and talking about issues that like everybody agrees with. It doesn't have to be political. Like, everybody wants to raise their babies in a world that, like, there are toxic chemicals we're exposing either our kids or ourselves to. Right? These are like very simple topics that you don't even have to say the words Big Tent. It's not like we're changing what our core principles are of the Republican Party. It's just like waking up and like injecting some common sense into all of this.
Right.
And I think that's why we saw such a shift from people that typically are more socially liberal come over to the conservative side, because they were just tired of, you know, being fed in some ways lies. And so really, I think that we're seeing a huge shift right now in my generation. I mean, you know, 40 years ago, there was a huge shift even between like the JFK Democrats to now. And so now we're kind of seeing another shift with different parties. And that's happened several times over the course of our country. And I think we're living in that right now.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's exciting times, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how it evolves with the different political parties changing. How, like, are there certain like mindsets or habits you have in order to stay like focused on being what do you call it, a citizen legislator? So it means, meaning you're, you know, still have your regular job and you're volunteering for, you know, basically won that position, but it's like kind of volunteering your time. Is that correct to say?
Oh, it's definitely volunteer work. We do not get paid very much money.
Okay. So you're doing that, so you balance all that, and then you have your personal life. How do you, what would you say, are some habits or mindset, things that you do to like stay focused on all, different aspects?
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't say that it would be, bad for me in some ways to give advice on this topic because I'm not perfect in this area and still learning. And I think anybody who has ever done something like this, whether it's run for a state legislative race or a city council race all the way up to, for Congress, is probably, one to admit very quickly that you fail very easily sometimes in juggling it all and balancing it all. But I think, one of the most important things to stay sane is to just, remember that at the end of the day, like you could lose your next election and you go back to real life, right? And so you have to just, remember that there are going to be people that no matter what you do are going to have something to say about it.
Right.
And that at the end of the day, like your bill failed, you can't be married to it.
Right.
And you just try your best and you fight the good fight and you fight for truth and for what you believe in. And if people continue to elect you and you can continue to juggle, then great. But there are too many people that I've seen, even just as an intern, that will over prioritize politics and then they lose sight of, family and, things that are way more important than any title or position or amount of power that you could ever have. And so that's, I think, something that you really have to be like grounded in, whether it be with your faith or whatever it is, that your values are properly aligned, that you're prioritizing what is most important to you. And that's never your position or anything that has to do with politics.
Yeah, no, nowadays with like 24 access to everything you say, video, like, this is being recorded and videoed, and it's just like, you kind of, I feel for you guys, because like, you now have to like, just kind of get to a mindset where you're relaxed, like, oh, well, if someone didn't like that, or, oh, well, that's going to be out there forever, and it's hard to do, you have to be really strong, so.
Yeah, I mean, even like my generation, everything that we've ever
I
done
know,
has been videotaped.
it's crazy, so I think that definitely takes like like a lot of people, care about what other people think. And like, if you're going to be a politician, you can't care. You can't, it's hard. So, okay. I like that. What, for like women who are listening to this, what advice do you want to give them?
I mean, I guess I would say that there's that quote that's like, you can do as a woman everything a man can do in heels and backwards, right?
Yeah.
And so I truly believe that, especially women with like little kids that are running for office. One of my colleagues in the Senate, she's just a few years older than me and has like 3 kids under the age of 4 or something like that. Like, I do not know how she does it, but it's just amazing to see that women can juggle so much. And so you are innately so capable of doing things that you would never imagine. And then like, just look at some of the guys that are doing this job and ask yourself, could you do their job better than they're doing it? And just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you are incapable or a disadvantage in any way, shape, or form. If anything, like, being a woman, you actually have some ways marketable things that the body probably very much needs, whether it's a city council of 5 people or a state legislature of 105 people.
Right.
And so I think the biggest piece of advice is to give yourself a little credit for what you already juggle as a woman, because we juggle so much and we face, I don't want to call them adversities, but it's just, there are things that, do, even getting up in the morning and having to like budget an hour to like do your hair and makeup,
Right.
because women have to like
I
have
know,
a certain appearance.
presentable,
Yeah. Like, there are just things that like
Yeah.
a guy can jump out in the morning and take a 5-minute shower and be at work and have 55 extra minutes of a day that we don't have, right? Little things like that can add up. And so it's not that you're disadvantaged, but like, take into account all the things that you've already accomplished up to this point and all the things that you faced, and to not let somebody discredit you just because you are a woman.
That's so, I agree, like the 55 minutes to get ready is like, every woman struggles with this, and guys don't understand, it's like, we don't have as much time as you.
Yeah.
So some people listening who don't know, you also were Miss South Dakota, right? So that took a lot of like leadership initiative. You had to learn how to talk in front of people and probably tell your story. And I don't know, I know it's very competitive and difficult to do that, so people might not know that. So what, do you think that helped prepare you to run for office at all? Or
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I actually wrote a paper in college on this very topic, because I was on scholarship in college, and they were like, you need to stop doing this pageant stuff. Like, it's not, you're taking too much time doing this. You need to focus on your studies. And in an effort to kind of
Right.
combat my
Yeah.
professors, I wrote
Yeah.
this research paper about how pageants are actually like a political training camp for women. And there are so many women who have come from the pageant world. Gretchen Carlson, Kara Munn just ran for North Dakota Congress seat. She was a former Miss America. There was a gal down in Alabama that just ran for Congress. The Secretary of State of Kentucky was a former Miss America. I mean, there's so many women. Avery Bishop was Miss Texas. She just ran for Texas House. I mean, there are so many examples that I could rattle off of women who came from the pageant world who are running in the political field. And it's because there are so many parallels. Yes, you have to have a message. You have to be polished. You have to be poised. You have to have a platform that you're essentially running on
Right.
to chase the crown. Very similar to when you're running for a seat, you have a message and a reason why you want to, be in that position of influence. And so I would not be the woman I am today if it hadn't been for the pageant world. And when you talk about fundraising
Right.
and donors, like a lot of the people who are philanthropic donors for like the pageant world also cross over into the political world.
Okay,
And
interesting.
so a lot of my big supporters I had met them because of being Miss South Dakota, because I would never have been in those rooms as a 20-year-old in college
Right.
had it not been for the pageant opportunity. And so it's interesting, especially as a girl, like my parents were never involved in politics. Like my mom jokes that I am only her daughter because I was the only baby born in the hospital that day. Otherwise it wouldn't make sense that I'm interested in all of this. And so when you don't have like a family background or a parent or somebody else that's kind of like introducing you to these circles, the pageant system really was able to usher me into kind of the pillars of the community or the leaders that are often involved in politics in my community.
The other thing too, is I don't think people know, is you also went to law school, right? So I think you mentioned it, but you went to Georgetown Law. And I think that's really like, again, that probably really has contributed to your success as well, right? So what was your experience in law school?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because I started law school after the pandemic. And so we were still like masking and all of that. And so it was very, very different to go from South Dakota, the Freedom State, where there was no restrictions, to law school on Zoom. But no, it was great for me because I was surrounded by people who had very different views than I did. And so, as you know, it's so important as a lawyer to know the other side's arguments almost better than your own so that you can counteract them. And so while it was a difficult time because there were so many people who did not agree with me and maybe saw me as the enemy, it was helpful because I learned what the other side thinks so that I could either, what we were talking about, like bring them into our party by explaining something that, maybe appealed to them in a way that they could understand. But it also, just helped me understand kind of where people are coming from, and just it made my belief system stronger, if anything, because I had to constantly defend myself. But I mean, just going to school in the place that laws are made in Washington, D.C., like I literally got to clerk on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then 2 minutes later, walk down the street to my legislative, interpretation class. And so while my professors maybe had very different philosophies than mine, they were still the top of their field and had worked for U.S. senators as their general counsels for 20 years, and very big names that many people would recognize that I would never have had access to had I stayed in South Dakota for school. So it was a huge, dream school. Like it even feels like unreal to say that out loud now that I was there. But even more so, it's so incredible to be able to take that education back to South Dakota and serve my home state, which so many, students don't ever have the opportunity to do, to go home and put that to use for your home state.
I know, very special. So South Dakota is lucky to have you. And I was like, do you want to say any other words or before we kind of end today?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me on.
Yes, no, thank you. So interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to, I guess, just share my story with other women that may be listening, because I think it's so important. There's a lot of rhetoric out there that, if you don't come from a political family, or you don't have the right last name, or, you don't have the fundraising background, whatever it is that people tell you, like, you can never do this. You can, if you have enough grit and initiative and make the right connections and work really hard. And so I always try to say, you can't see it if you can't, or you can't be it if you can't see it.
Right.
And so I try to, share my story as much as possible. So I really, really appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you for being here. We will post your information on where we can find you.
Yeah.
I think you are on Instagram, and we'll get that and we'll have it tied to this as well.
All right.
So
Thanks, Megan.
you're welcome. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the Business Talk podcast and leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. Thank you for joining us today. This has been another episode of Business Talk with Meghan McNulty.